welcome back to SMWX, and things are about to get lit on this channel. So many of you have asked if I can try my hardest to interview the legal titan and historical maverick author, Advocate Thembeka Ngcukaitobi, and guess what? We pulled it off for you. So Advocate Ngcukaitobi, thank you so much for joining SMWX.
No, it's a pleasure. I was looking forward to this interview myself.
This office, I don't know how much it's seen in the last just year alone, but this is kind of like the union buildings, I guess.
No, I think there will be intense competition for that. So I'd rather say perhaps which one is the big wing of the union building?
Right.
The west.
This is, yeah, okay, so this is...
Perhaps the smaller wing.
No, it's amazing. I was checking out your bookshelf, which is quite... I couldn't look at any of these old law things, but the normal books I was really interested in. And I suppose that brings us onto... There's so much we could talk about. But I just wanted to ask you firstly from a personal perspective. I remember the first time I ever saw you was actually at the Madlanga Commission.
Yeah.
And
forgot about that, yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, there's this like young advocate. Wow, cool.
Yeah.
5 years later,
you
have been catapulted onto the forefront of South Africa's literary scene with your amazing book, and you are one of the leading advocates in the country. And that, I was checking how old you are recently, and it feels kind of like you're older than you are because of all that you're doing.
Yeah.
But how's that been for you? Because the last 5 years have been sensational.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's very difficult from where I sit. I mean, because I don't sort of like sit in self-evaluation in that respect. But I mean, the fact for me is that I've basically worked all my life as a lawyer. And so it sort of feels like a continuous, unbroken period. The only thing that has changed is that my work is now in sort of public spotlight. But in relation to what I do every day, which is to come to the office, to see clients, to help them with their problems and to go to court to argue one way or the other, there is continuity there that is unbroken. But it is true that in the past 5 years, probably 6 years, the work that I do is now much more public. So that's the only distinction that I would say, is that there is an interest in what we do. But that's not me as such. It is that the legal landscape now occupies a center stage in the public imagination, largely because of the taking of political questions and giving them a legal flavor. So many questions today that are routinely argued in court, if you brought them to court 10 years ago, the judges would have probably laughed you out of court. But if you bring those cases today to court, courts are much more receptive to listening to those arguments. So it's not me as such. I think a whole range of us who do the work that connects politics to law are suddenly finding themselves on people's television screens, in their bedrooms and in their sitting rooms in ways that were not possible 20 years ago, largely because I think the complexion of law is changing. Law is increasingly getting into a political space, and the bounds of constitutionalism are growing and growing, you know, every day, and concepts that were sacred to the executive and sacred to parliament are no longer sacred and are no longer exclusively parliamentary. Is that a good thing? I guess it is for lawyers.
So you're happy?
No, yeah. I think that what we are witnessing is an actualization of the basic premise of the Constitution: transparency, accountability, the rule of law. It was difficult, I think, 20 years ago to figure out what those concepts mean. But it's now much easier that once all public power is subject to judicial scrutiny, what is happening is the translation of that concept into some kind of practical manifestation on the ground. I mean, the idea that, for instance, a president of the country could be called to account to the Constitutional Court about the personal usage of funds, like it happened in March 2016 in the Nkandla case, was probably unthinkable during Mandela's era. Although, of course, it's probably Mandela who started the possibility of subjecting himself to judicial scrutiny with his decision to appoint the SARFO Commission of Inquiry. But the extent to which it has grown over time, I think, has been quite remarkable. So I would say that is the real development. And so what we then become as lawyers is just conduits, instruments, interlocutors.
And there are some, actually internationally and domestically, who think that this is maybe not such a great thing. I was listening to the Wreath lectures by UK.
Yes, Jonathan Sumption.
Yeah. When he was talking about the expanding empire of law in the UK context. It seems as though you're painting a similar picture in South Africa. But he was kind of warning against too much judicial power over political decisions. Do you think we're at a point of potential overreach, or are people who are a bit worried about that jumping the gun?
No, I mean, I think that I don't think we are at a point of overreach, certainly in South Africa. Because if you think at what the issues are that are coming to the Constitutional Court, or even in the High Courts for that matter, it's instances that manifest a collapse within the executive branch or a collapse within the legislative branch. So take, for instance, the secret ballot case. What was at issue in the secret ballot case was the failure by the Speaker to exercise a discretion which the Constitution allows her, when she completely refused to allow a secret ballot and misread the provision that allowed the secret ballot to say that it didn't allow the secret ballot. So the case ultimately generates a lot of political interest, but at its core, there is a simple legal question. Does she have a discretion in relation to the clause properly construed? The same thing with the Nkandla case. It generates a lot of political heat. But if you actually look at what the light is, it's actually quite simple. The Constitution provides in Section 96 that no member of the executive may place their interests in conflict with their official interests. And so that is eminently a justiciable question. So the questions that are coming to the courts are questions that should, in fact, be coming to the courts, but they are questions that are illustrative of a larger problem, which is the collapse of the executive and the sometimes failure by the legislature to play its constitutional role. I usually think that at the forefront of constitutional implementation should be the executive. The executive should be the first branch to translate the Constitution into executive action. But it should be overseen by the legislature through passing of laws, and that the last branch should be the judiciary. But there are gaps with the first and the second, and hence the judiciary plays a much more active role. But I would say also in relation to the UK experience, the same debate was happening last week in the Brexit context.
Absolutely.
And
I saw you sharing the link on Twitter.
Yeah, of course. I suppose in that sense.
Yeah.
You know, so if you look there in the UK, there have been diametrically opposed outcomes. In Scotland, they found that the question was justiciable. The question of prorogation by the Prime Minister was justiciable. In England and Wales, the High Court found it was not justiciable. It was interesting to watch the exchanges from the bench. I mean, people like Lady Hale actually think the question is justiciable. What they may be worried about is what remedy should be granted. So even though someone like Jonathan Sumption is sounding a warning, the actual practice on the ground there is again to move towards the expansion of the constitutional empire.
Well, when you say that, you cause me to think of the counter that often isn't put, which is, what if there's judicial underreach and the executive breaks the law, but the judiciary feels too scared to dip into the political terrain and then starts to make political calculations, thereby underreaching and allowing the law to be broken? That surely can't persist.
I mean, that is the other side of the coin, is that where we are, I mean, I think the problem we have in this country certainly is the failure of the executive to take seriously the constitutional project, because it should be at the forefront of the analysis, but also interpretation of the constitutional project. And the same with the legislature. That's the structure of the Constitution. So the first body that should decide what the Constitution requires is the executive. But contrary to the expected sort of constitutional norm, what we find is the executive going the opposite way. And so the cases that come are cases trying to stop the executive from breaching the law, alternatively cases that are trying to compel them to comply with the Constitution. But I think where there is a gap in constitutional terms is their failure to understand that the structure of the Constitution requires the executive to be at the forefront of constitutional interpretation.
So I feel like we could just go on this and Lord Sumption's lectures for an hour, but I wanted to come back to the personal as well, because you said, you know, this is an interesting moment for prominent lawyers in the country to the extent that legal issues are so much at the forefront. And what's that like on a personal level? Because I've had some experience watching, you know, 1 minute you take one case, you're everybody's favorite. The next minute you take another case and suddenly there's a conspiracy in the opposite direction. We spoke to Advocate Skakane on this show as well, who's, you know, been at the center of a number of controversial cases. And that can put burdens on advocates, especially when there's public pressure. Have you felt, you know, the pressure when you're, you know, having to take on sometimes diametrically opposing cases because that's your responsibility and your role as an advocate?
Yes, at the moment I am taking a diametrically opposed.
That seems to be the order of the day for everyone.
Look, although it is true that, I mean, we must take whatever case comes according to the so-called Cap-Brand rule. The reality is that we do have a measure of choice about what work we ultimately do. I happen to take a particular brand of cases and for a particular category of clients. And then from time to time that is then broken. And so from that point of view, it doesn't always feel like it's too much of a pressure, because I'm not always having to be in a sort of conflicting position. But I do think that at a personal level, it does put one under some pressure. But I would say that our if I took political cases, so let us make an example, I act for the president of the ANC, and then in the next case I act for the president of the EFF. And so they are on, you know, polar opposites of the political spectrum. The fact is that our politicians are relatively mature about those questions. We can mention Julius Malema in particular. He is someone who is actually very mature about understanding what role lawyers play in society. The same thing can be said about the president of the country, Cyril Ramaphosa. He is someone very mature about what the Constitution requires and entitles lawyers to do.
Even so after your line of questioning at the Madlanga Commission.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I actually never watched that video afterwards, you know, but...
Wow,
yeah,
I did.
Yeah, but I sort of thought, you know, I wasn't, unfair to the president. Well, at the time, the deputy president, I thought that the questions were fair. I mean, of course, they were robust, and I think once I got the answers that I wanted, I moved on.
No, absolutely, and I think it's fantastic. I've obviously myself seen, you know, how difficult it can be to, you know, choose who to represent, and I think while politicians are often very mature, the public is not as mature often, and there are burdens placed on lawyers which are, in my view, often undue.
No, I can't deny that. I think that is absolutely true. But I think that if we don't insist on an independent profession of advocates, which is capable of representing anyone under whatever circumstances. I can make various examples from history, recent history and old history. I remember speaking to George Bezos, who told me that there was a point at which lawyers were very reluctant to represent Nelson Mandela because he was regarded as an outlaw, and that it was the exception rather than norm to represent him. But of course in the 90s and the 2000s, it was a scramble to represent Nelson Mandela because the intervening 30-40 years had changed the man from a terrorist to statesman. There was also a point when it was hard to find lawyers to represent Julius Malema shortly after his expulsion from the ANC, and I remember lawyers who took the case. I mean, Sikakane himself, Vincent Malega, I think Sizwe Mpofu actually might have been involved in the case. And even when the EFF was established, you know, Julius gave the interview with the Sunday Times that there was a sense of in which people were reluctant. That is when I came into the representation of the EFF. So I think unless we insist on an independent, critical and robust legal profession, it's very hard to see how the constitutional project can be sustained and kept together. And so I think we should refuse the public pressure and because if we started pandering to the public pressure, the effect, the negative ramifications will be experienced by the constitutional project as a whole. So I spoke recently in Cape Town about the fact that Jacob Zuma, has become someone rather unpopular to act for, but I was in that context praising our colleagues, Thabani Masuku, Moses Kakane, who've taken on the representation of Jacob Zuma, regardless of what we might think about him right now, So things were not always like that. So things change. I mean, there is, of course, now the views taken about what the EFF does represent, and quite critical views. But a lawyer should never allow those to influence the decision. It's always, and Arthur Charles pointed this, it's usually those people at the margins, the social outcasts, social and political outcasts, I would add, that deserve more representation than those that are in the mainstream. So I think we must actively resist any kind of public pressure to prescribe who we should act for.
Well, part of what has been controversial about the EFF is the way that they've reintroduced the land debate into South Africa, which seems to have moved gears in terms of its priority in South Africa. And you have been at the center of questions of land, both from your writing to your legal work, both as an advocate, but also most recently as a judge. And so I wanted to turn to land now. And let's start with the Section 25 question, but then we'll move on to some of the points you've been making which go deeper than Section 25, because it does seem that the debate has been stuck there. What's your position on Section 25? Is it absolutely crucial that it's amended to include expropriation without compensation, or should we leave it alone?
No, it's not crucial at all. If the goal is to achieve expropriation without compensation, that goal can be achieved without amending Section 25. It seems to me, as a legal question at the very least, as opposed to a political question, it seems to me as a legal question that expropriation without compensation can be achieved in one of three ways. One way is by passing legislation to expressly limit the right to compensation that in Section 25, right, if that exists. And that right can be found in Section 36 of the Constitution. Any right in the Constitution can be limited. So if those people argue that there is an entrenched right to compensation, that can be limited by passing national legislation. And if you pass national legislation, there will simply be no point to the amendment. The second instance in which an expropriation without compensation can be achieved is where a judge, in their determination of just an equitable remedy, decides that in a particular setting there should be no compensation paid. And that is within the framework of what justice and equity actually mean. And the third one is by a direct amendment to the Constitution itself. The first two of these mechanisms have simply never been tested in South Africa, because we work, and I think we've been on the extreme side, we've worked on the basis that A, compensation is constitutionally compulsory, and B, when compensation is paid, it should be market-based. So I gave a judgment about 4 years ago when I started acting in the Land Claims Court, which debunked the myth of a market-based compensation system. And so even though I still accepted compensation as a principle, but I wrote a judgment that found that market-based compensation is not part and parcel of the Constitution. Market-based is the so-called willing buyer, willing seller. Now that came purely as a consequence of an executive decision, a policy decision taken by the Department of Land Affairs many, many years ago, that when they acquire land for restitution or land reform purposes, they would do so through the application of market-based strategies. So is it crucial? No, it's not crucial. Legislation can be passed, judicial determinations can be made, and indeed the Constitution itself might be amended. But in either of those, constitutional amendment is not a prerequisite to attain EWC. But I also don't see EWC as central to land reform. It's a tiny part of land reform. In fact, compensation hardly accounts for the problems with the land reform in this country. There are very few cases that are pending because of compensation. Many cases are pending and unresolved for a whole range of other reasons which have little to do with compensation. So I'm afraid the energy that is expended on compensation is unjustified by the nature of the problem.
That's a really fascinating take. I've never thought about it from the perspective of the different routes you could go to pursue compensation or a lack of compensation, and realizing that the Constitution isn't the only route.
Yes.
A number of judgments, one of which you were the central author of, but there's also been land questions raised at the Constitution recently, have shone a light on the major executive deficiencies in the process of land reform. And this is something that you've constantly said needs to be foregrounded, as opposed even to constitutional questions on the one hand, or even historical on the other, the failure of the state to actually implement.
Yes.
Take us through your view of how the state is failing and how these different judgments paint a picture of the failure of executive infrastructure as it relates to land in South Africa.
I mean, what I do think that the land debate has been sort of taken over by legalese and by lawyers and by sort of constitutionalists. But the land debate is truly political. What it requires is political commitment. And the Constitution simply gives us a framework. But taking that framework from the promise to reality requires political will. And I think that's what we've actually been missing. It's been a total collapse of the institutions, but also a lack of concerted political interest in resolving the land question. So the first thing we need is a paradigm shift and I wouldn't say that the government is deliberately neglecting the question of land, but I think that there is a certain level of carelessness, a certain level of negligence when it comes to the land issue. It's simply not a priority. All of these cases you're talking about illustrate exactly that problem. So let's go to the question of the institutional collapse. When 1994 happened, the promise was that the government would set up key institutions that would be responsible to implement all of the three programs of land reform: security of tenure, restitution, and redistribution, because those are the three elements of land reform. But they would be driven or underpinned by three key institutions. The first would be the Commission for Restitution of Land Rights. The second would be the Department of Land Affairs. And the third would be overseen by the judicial arm, which would be the Land Claims Court. So if you take a stock about where we are, the Department of Land Affairs over time has just been allowed to collapse. It's certainly been consigned into a wasteland. The officials in the department come and go. It's been broken apart, rural development added, split, agriculture added, split, and then reconstituted again. And different ministers have come and gone. The consequence is that there is policy incoherence. So you start off with one strategy, but the next minister develops a different strategy. But insofar as the department itself as a viable instrument or institution for land reform, what you find is there is a massive shortage of people, a massive shortage of skill, massive shortage of talent. And then if you go to the commission, we experience more or less the same crisis, the crisis of absence of personnel. And again, the lack of continuity. They began with certain projects in 1994. Over time, those projects have largely collapsed. And if you then go to the third arm, which is the judicial arm, the Land Claims Court, I've had some experience. I sometimes feel for judges who accept appointment to the Land Claims Court, because the one thing is that the Land Claims Court was designed to be a 5-year court. And the reason why that was so is because in the Ready to Govern document of the ANC passed in 1992, 1993, I can't remember. The idea was that the land reform project would be fast-tracked in the first 5 years of Nelson Mandela's government. And so they designed a court whose duration would be 5 years, and the appointment of judges would also be 5 years. Because they thought they would be able, in the first 5 years, to achieve a 30% redistribution of commercial land, agriculturally commercial land. They discovered that it was a problem to do it. And I think the statistics show that by that stage, the end of Nelson Mandela's tenure, only 2% of land had in fact been restituted. The numbers now are difficult to work out, but some people are putting at 7%, 9%, etc. In fact, the University of the Western Cape suggested that if we continued according to the current trajectory, we're looking at 140 years to restitute only 30%. So what's clear is that the system is not working at all, and hence my focus has not so much been an obsession with what the Constitution provides, but with what are the institutions that we need to drive sustainable land reform. And that's why I've come to the two conclusions. The one is what we need. We need an institution that's underpinned by the rule of law, because what we don't want is a chaotic system that ultimately works against the very intended beneficiaries.
Sure.
But what we need also is a massive realignment of institutions that will be driving land reform. I mean, this idea of having a chaotic revolution, I mean, ultimately works against the interests of the intended beneficiaries of the revolution. In order for the revolution to work, it needs to be driven by proper state institutions, and that is where the problems have been. And so to come back then to your question about what these cases have highlighted. So take one case, which is the Hilton case about labor tenants. So
this
case,
is Justice Cameron's...
But yes, the Constitutional Court judgment. In fact, it comes all the way from the Land Claims Court. Justice Mncube from the Land Claims Court gave an order that said the department has failed to resolve labor tenancy claims over such a long period of time. And the collapse has been so spectacular that he had to appoint someone else as an outsider, this person called a special master, to oversee all of the outstanding claims for labor tenants. The Supreme Court of Appeal overturned the judgment on the basis that the Land Claims Court has no power to make an order saying a departmental function must be shifted to a special master. The Constitutional Court reinstated the judgment of the Land Claims Court, saying that the extent of the collapse is staggering. And in fact, it's a wonderful judgment to read, because for the first time the court drills into what the bureaucratic failures have been and makes reference to Deputy President Motlante's panel report, which actually says the problems we are having, if you are looking for evidence for the problems we are having have a lot to do with the system that is not working, And so it actually means, even if we resolve the Section 25 issue, if we don't have systems to drive land reform, we will come back to the same problem 20 years later. So that's the judgment that assigns or reassigns executive power into a master. So take another case by the Constitutional Court, a judgment by Justice Madlanga, also the most remarkable judgment, not on labor tenancy claims, but on restitution, which again highlights the problem of the collapse of restitution and says that the department, the Commission for Restitution of Land Rights, must now report regularly to the Land Claims Court, and the Land Claims Court is playing a supervisory role, right? And so take the one case you were asking me about, the judgment I gave in the District 6 case.
Yeah,
I mean,
talk about excoriating.
Yeah, it really makes your heart break, because
we actually had a news insert on it, and just the number of people who are messaging us on the channel from District 6 about a 25 year failure to even do the most basic things was quite heart-wrenching.
Yes, exactly. And most of these are detailed and catalogued in the judgment. The judgment was, about issues of contempt and personal costs, etc. But none of those things actually made sense unless you went through the detail of setting out the story of the 1960s and the 1970s, which is where dispossession happened. And one of the things about District 6 is it shows you, dispossession was a violent process, and the violence didn't end with the colonial conquest. It actually continued throughout the apartheid period. And that's why it's legitimate for people in District 6 to expect that when the new government comes in, they would be among the first to have their interests prioritized. And that story about District 6, again, I don't think the government is deliberately ignoring them, but I think there's just a sense of extreme level of recklessness and just carelessness about what are the priorities. I mean, what are the priorities of government if it is not to return land? Because what's clear about that case is that they just never prioritized it at all. And the order that I suggested there is that the matter again needs to be reassigned to the deputy presidency. You can combine the three judgments and look at what is at the center of all of them. At the center of all of them has been a degree of culpability of the state, which fails to do the things that the law says must be done. Not only the law says must be done, they themselves promise every election that their priority will be to resolve people's concerns. So the constitutional project, in fact, gets to evaporate in the hands of the executive because of unfulfilled promises. And that's why I think over time and with the experience, I do think that we have invested a lot of time on the issue of compensation and neglected, where the real pain is.
Well, we've dealt with the question of land, but I just finally wanted to come to another key question in our democracy that you've been at the center of, which is this question of freedom of expression.
Yeah.
And I think it's quite interesting because on one hand, in the SANEF-EFF case, you were arguing about the need for that freedom to be widened. And then you've also been involved in this crucial case with the NMF apartheid flag, where you've drawn the limits of that expression.
Yeah.
How has working on these two cases informed your view of freedom of expression, and how do you see both that it needs to be widened, but to very severe limits?
Yeah. Now, the most fascinating thing is the historical and the comparative on expression. The Americans, because of their own history, have the sort of most wide and most unlimited version of expression. But if you went to Europe, particularly because of their experience with fascism and Hitler and the linkages they draw between speech and action, have a much more restricted ambit of freedom of expression. And in fact, they actively regulate speech, sometimes through criminal action. So if people said things that praised Hitler, in many countries like Poland, they would be locked up. Whereas in America, you can say anything you want, with very little consequences. But South Africa is closer to the European experience because what we are grappling with in South Africa is a question of a historical denial of dignity. A group of people coming from Europe occupying the country and then over 400 years deliberately denigrating the status, dignity and reputation of Africans. And once you have a constitutional project, one of the first things that you have to restore is people's dignity, the basic respect of people. The key question for me has always been, where is the balance to be struck between the ability of people to speak, because speaking also is part and parcel of the definition of what it means to be a human being, and dignity at the same time. What's clear in our constitution is what the Constitutional Court has repeatedly said in cases like Khumalo versus Olomisa, which is that expression doesn't occupy a special place in our foundation as a nation. It occupies its place alongside other important values. Most important value in this country is equality, and another important value is dignity. So insofar as expression might denigrate one's dignity and might denigrate one's right to equality, it seems to me it needs to make way for claims of equality and for claims of dignity. Because where we are in our constitutional system, we obviously apartheid as a formal legal term has ended. But apartheid in a social, political and economic sense continues. And we are not going to address it if people are not deliberately told that there are certain things that are so hurtful that they shouldn't be said to others. And so it's a question of how to create a society that is based on respect and on decency. So you can take the Nelson Mandela Foundation case, where one of the points that we make is that, certainly the points I argued, was that it's impossible for us to tell people not to be racist. And it's also impossible for the law to do that. What the law can do is to protect others from having their dignity undermined in ways that there is nothing they can do about it. There is nothing I can do about the fact that I'm black. There's nothing I can do about the fact that I may be gay, or there's nothing I can do about the fact that I may be a woman, because those are just part and parcel of those features that are innate in one's personality. And so there shouldn't be group insult based on such features. And so that, I think, has been the key question for me, is that I think that equality and dignity actually are much more important than concerns of expression. But I do think the SANEF case raises a different issue, because it's not a clash between dignity on the one hand and expression on the other, but it is a clash between political freedoms and the limitation of expression. And so the one way of looking at SANEF is to see it as a small political party trying to create space for its political activity within, I mean, of course, people will disagree with this, but within a context where the political space is narrow and is getting narrower and narrower, every day. So once you are dealing with these two rights, one is Section 19 and the other is Section 16, I would say that expression then becomes part and parcel of the arsenal of a small political party. So the point to be defended there is not the right of Malema to insult people, but it is the right of Malema to make political statements without the risk that political statements will be outlawed. It's much better for me that Malema insults the president than he gets sanctioned for insulting the president.
I'm not going to go any further on that because I'll be accused of various things. But I think I watched your arguments in the SANEF case, and I was, and your colleagues' arguments, and I was just, riveted. And I want to come on to a little bit of that to close off, which is your craft. The actual role of being an advocate, of deploying rhetoric, of turning a phrase. I think in the public protector case recently, it became clear that you had mastered that craft, and there was just this, people didn't even like necessarily the argument you were making, but they were like the way you were making it.
Yeah.
So tell us how you hone that craft, and, are there things you do to try and become better with rhetoric? Do you read? Do you listen? How do you build your arguments and hone that craft?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that I don't consciously do it.
Yeah. I kind of got
that. That would be false modesty. Perhaps false praise. Look, I think firstly, speaking and writing come from reading. Certainly speaking in court, they come from reading. So it's true that I read widely, and I read outside law. I read history, and I read European, African, American history, and good books that are, written well, are very helpful in improving one's sort of vocabulary.
So do you read them sometimes with that purpose? Like, oh wow, that's a nice way to put that. If I were to use that, that would be a nice way to kind of frame that argument.
No, I never do, but what happens actually incidentally is that when you are on your feet, some of the thoughts of the things you've been reading come in, and they can be deployed if the moment requires it. So that's the first thing, is to read widely and to read outside of law, to read philosophy, politics. Sometimes if you can master reading an economics book, you should do that. But there are books like Thomas Piketty's, which are sort of readable if you can, finish 700 pages. And then reading history. And so, and that's the one thing. But the other thing is watching other lawyers practice, especially lawyers that you admire. So I watch, I watch Sizwe Mpofu. There are things he can say that I can't say, but there are also
welcome to the club.
yeah. So things that he can say that I just know that it would not be right for me to say, and the things he can put in a particular way that I can rephrase, but to have the same sort of impact. So he is the one person I like watching when arguing. Jeremy Gauntlet is another, like watching Gauntlet. Vemtrengov is another who's sort of clinical with words and uses very few words, but uses them very effectively.
So sometimes when you're like in a case, maybe even opposing, and you see something that another counsel does, you're like, that's actually...
No, absolutely. I am always, especially the people that I sort of admire, I always watch, how they do it. I also even watch things like their posture, their delivery, and what they do when they're under pressure, So it's that element as well of sort of watching and learning by observation, and just looking at what they do, even if you're doing nothing in court. And even if somebody is delivering an argument against your argument, just watching how he dismantles your argument, and then hopefully, next time you can use the same sort of skill to dismantle. And now, of course, the one thing that gripped me last week was watching the Supreme Court lawyers in the UK, and how they deploy their own craft. And it was fascinating for me to sit and watch. And of course, so there are those three things, which is, just reading widely, and then watching local and international. And then, of course, what you cannot substitute is hard work. It's like spending long and long hours alone, trying to figure out. Sometimes what I find with preparation is that you know what the answer is, but what will make you win a case is communicating the right answer in the right way. So you will draft the answer and then communicate the answer and realize that it's not having an impact, and then do it again and again and again until you find the right rhythm for the delivery. Because with advocacy, there has to be a balance, between the written and the spoken. There has to be a balance between the right answer and its delivery. Because if you have a right answer that is delivered badly, it can be missed. Whereas sometimes you can have a bad answer, but well executed, that nevertheless will have an impact. So I try to draw
a well-executed answer that's wrong.
Yes, exactly. A bad answer, but well executed. So that's the thing, is trying to draw the linkages between finding the right answer, but also delivering it in a way that speaks to the fact that it's the right answer. And the last thing I would say is just remembering that judges are human. Judges, respond to the human touch. You can address a man intellectually, but I think until you can connect the intellect and the soul, you have still not spoken to him.
Well, I have to confess that I often watch your interventions to try and figure out how to craft my arguments. So you're not the only one.
I'm not the only one watching. Yeah, I'm also being watched.
Advocate Mugai told me there are so many other things that I could canvass with you, but you've been very generous with your time. So I just want to thank you so much for joining us on SMWX.
Thank you, and well done. Congratulations. I've been a big follower and a fan of your work. And actually, last year, I must confess, I bought 5 copies of your book, and I looked for you, and I didn't look for you, I looked for Dad.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get hold of him, so I just went home and distributed 5 copies.
Wow.
So, and the people that I gave to, one of them has read it. I think the other 4 are too lazy. So thanks for the work you do. I'm really impressed, and I'm a big fan.
The feeling is more than mutual.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for joining us once again on SMWX. Spread the fire, like, share and subscribe on YouTube. Join the channel, smwx.co.za.
I think America's probably one of the worst places one can be born in if you're black and a woman. Myself and 2 other very nerdy friends would in like the December holidays go to the Constitutional Court to go hear cases. At so many levels, South Africans can perform and compete and be better. The Constitution is an empty shell in the absence of action. You often find judges almost forced in cases to be activists in their role beyond what we imagine judges to be able to do.
Spread the fire, everyone. Welcome to SMWX. Today I'm joined by a really fascinating, brilliant guest who I admire greatly. You may have seen him at the International Court of Justice, where he was a member of the legal team. And ever since then, his rates have gone very high if you want his services, just to let you know. Advocate Tsidiso Ramokale, thank you and welcome to SMWX.
Thank you for having me.
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
As Jay-Z said, yeah.
It's so great to have you with us. Of course, I think the nation became aware of your brilliance, although many of us knew about it before when you were at the ICJ. And today I just want to take a journey through your legal journey, culminating in the ICJ, which we'll get to. But I suppose what I'm really interested to start off with is, what was the moment when you realized that you wanted to be a lawyer? And what was the moment that you realized that you wanted to become an advocate within the legal profession?
Thank you. It was probably, my family, I think it's a story that's now sort of well told, was subject to an eviction. I was probably 13, 14 at the time. I think I was in grade, whatever age it is, at grade 7 or 8, around that time. But it was just the injustice that followed the system. The idea that you can have a home today and then it's sold the next day, and then you're told to leave and you're kicked out. And just the helplessness of that time. I remember my mother scrambling, moving from pillar to post, trying to sort all of this out. It just felt deeply wrong. So that's the first. The second was, I was always in debating society and public speaking at school. And my aunt had always said that I have a hot head and refuse to. When I've got a bone of contention, I refuse to let it go until I win the point. And it was just that thing where, family says, that's the space that you're in. School teachers would tell you, you should be a lawyer, you're very argumentative. So that sort of stuck. When I thought of courses to take up at universities, law was the first one, and it made sense. And it was a gamble. I didn't know whether I'd like it or not. There are no lawyers in my family. In fact, I'm the first one to go to university in my family. So it was a complete gamble. There wasn't really anybody within my immediate radius that I could reach out to and say, what does this thing look like? So applied, I got in. I only applied at WITS, actually. That was also a gamble. Wow. Because I didn't do UCT and UP that other people actually do. I only applied at WITS and got in there.
Why WITS only?
There was a thing at that time. My sister, my siblings would always, the WITS was, I still think it is, but at the time it was WITS or nothing. UCT wasn't in the realm of, I wouldn't say possibility, but it just wasn't seen as important, as prestigious as WITS was. So I went for that. And thankfully in first year I fell in love with law.
Tell us about that process of thinking that you could be good at this, thinking that you could be interested, and then when you actually meet the subject, and that moment where you're like, wow, the law is something that really resonates with me.
Yeah, I think what made that journey particularly interesting was the transition from the old apartheid system into our constitutional democracy. Where right at the beginning of the Constitution, there's a recognition of the injustices of the past and a commitment to do better going forward. And so a deep sense of injustice is something I had always been concerned about, and something that I'm deeply passionate about eradicating. And so it fell quite naturally, which is the reason why courses such as constitutional law or public interest litigation or legal clinics at law school were my favorite ones. And I just gobbled it up. There was this big book by Ian Curry. It's called the Bill of Rights Handbook. I'm sure you've seen it.
Oh, yes.
It was such easy reading. Wow. I would be 2-3 chapters ahead of the class at a time, because it just felt like a natural flow. And so that's the reason why I knew that this was actually the right place. It just came as second nature. So it was that, but I remember particularly a story that resonated with me was a case of Gundwana. I came across that in a pun law class in the first year, and in Gundwana there was a mother who had 2 kids, if I recall correctly. She lived in her home for about 20 years, and her house was sold in execution by Nedbank. And she brought a case before the High Court challenging the sale of her house, but particularly because the process at that time was, if there was no contestation about the sale, and there's debates about is there a real contestation or not, because often, and I think it's still the same way we do things today, when we serve legal documents, we serve it through the sheriff's office, or you get a little slip from the post office saying you've got mail. And there are debates about whether there's an effective way of actually bringing to the attention of someone that something very immaterial is about to happen to them. And so similarly with Gundwana, it was that same process where she contested whether the case was properly brought before her and to her attention, and went to court. And the way in which it worked at that time was that the registrar, if there was no contestation, the registrar would sign the sale of execution. That was the end of it.
Right.
And so Gundwana changed the law in that she was unhappy with that outcome. She appealed to the Supreme Court of Appeal, and ultimately it got to the Con Court. And in the Constitutional Court, it said it was unconstitutional for a person's home to be sold in execution without a judge overseeing that. Because what 26(3) of the Constitution requires is a judge to engage in that, competing considerations and a value judgment, essentially.
Right.
But do I give the order? Do I not give the order? Because you're about to sell somebody's home. And so the idea that it's an administrative process where the registrar just signs an order and that's it, your home is gone, just doesn't countenance with the spirit of the Constitution. So Gundwana was very similar to what happened to my family and I. And sort of a promise that I had made to myself that if I ever came across this kind of cases, that I would be the lawyer that helps out. So it was important. It was both personally an important goal, but it's just something I was purely interested in as well. Yeah.
You make your way through Wits and presumably, fall deeper in love with the law and come to grapple with it even more extensively. And then you make your way, in which point of the journey do you make your way to Harvard, where you go to one of the world's best law schools?
It was, so I finished Wits. I then went to the Constitutional Court,
right,
and clerked for Justice Khampepe at the time. I think she became the acting Deputy Chief Justice or acting Chief Justice, whatever the title was at the time. And it was a great time. I think to this day, second to my job now, the best job I've had.
Wow.
So I'd encourage...
That's the place to be, right? If you want to understand
100%. Yeah, it's just the creme de la creme of cases. You're working with our country's best legal minds. You get involved in the cases, so you're not doing, filing work or anything of that sort. You'll do that. Somebody has to do it, and it won't be the judge.
Yeah.
But you really get your teeth in, and to do it as a young lawyer is really shaping. So I clerked for Justice Khampepe, and the Con Court runs.
Yeah. No, I want to actually carry on with the Con Court clerking journey.
Yeah. So the Con Court runs a foreign law clerks program. Right. Basically, any clerk, any lawyer really around the world can apply to this program. And in each chamber, the way in which it works is that each judge is entitled to have 2 clerks. But then when you have foreign clerks, your chamber can beef up to 3, 4, 5, whatever the number. Right. And so the foreign clerkship program is that, so it attracts lawyers around the world. In that year, there was a Yale law graduate, her name is Alana Kembabazi, who was clerking in the same chambers as I was. Prior to her, there was a guy called Rob Stanley. But Alana was from Uganda, strong African roots, strong black woman, and we were just talking about, and we became very good friends as a result of that, just talking about like career goals and what are you going to do afterwards. And I remember saying to her, I've always been curious about doing a master's, I'll probably do it at Wits. And she was like, but why would you, you've just come from Wits, why would you do another degree here? I said, well, where else can one go? UCT? She said, no, you can go abroad. Like, that's just not possible. I had not known anybody in my space who had gone to a Harvard, a Yale. Alana was the first.
Sure.
And yeah, she was just like, just do it. And so I then started looking into those programs. I thought, oh wow, it actually is possible. There's whole programs that exist. I had always imagined that US law schools are only interested in Americans studying there. Same with the English schools, etc. And so when Alana had literally just from that conversation completely changed my trajectory, I thought Harvard was impossible. And in fact, the school I had aimed for first was Columbia. That was a school I thought, if there's a chance I could get in, maybe I could go there. So I applied to Columbia, applied to Berkeley, applied to Michigan, applied to UCLA, certainly more than my Wits application. Where else did I apply? Quite a few. I think I applied to about 6 schools. Harvard was like, there was Notre Dame. But Harvard was literally the last application I made, because I just thought, well, I'm here already, might as well just apply. What harm is there?
Sure.
And it was a school I got into. I got into, in fact, all of the schools.
Oh, snap.
Huh?
He says,
yeah. So I got into all of the schools, but Harvard had made, in fact, in addition to getting in, had made the most attractive financial aid offer. So it was an easy choice. It was an easy choice getting there. Yeah.
Amazing. And what was it like when you got to Harvard? And what did you learn at Harvard that you still keep with you now?
Sure. The American experience was both jarring and like life-changing. At first, it was a deep disappointment in the American life, American system. I think America is probably one of the worst places one can be born in if you're black and a woman, and probably one of the worst places you can be born in if you're poor, because I found it to be a deeply uncaring society about its marginalized, about people it had discarded. So that was the one, and you see it all over. You really, a friend of mine likes to say, like, America is like a third world country with a Gucci belt, you know. So that was the one experience I had. The other was, it was a place of immense privilege. And so you really traverse both worlds. You see people who are marginalized in the one, literally, as you step out of Harvard, on my first day, you see people, streams of people lying on the sidewalk, sleeping there.
Absolutely.
That is their home.
Yeah.
And you then step onto the campus and it's this beautiful, you know, red brick building. When you walk into the building, there's marble all over the, you know, you could just see the wealth.
Yeah.
And so people often speak about, for instance, you know, as you fly into Cape Town and you see Khayelitsha on the left and then, you know, Table Mountain on the right, that disparity, or similarly Alex and Sandton, but you see the exact same thing in the US. Everywhere you go, exact same thing. And it was shocking because that's not the America I had in my head. The America I had in my head was, you know, everybody's doing well, everybody's taken care of, a person got a job or 2 jobs, you know. And so that was shocking because you're told when you leave South Africa, you're going into the first world. You're going to a place where things work. And they work, but it depends on who you are and your access to privilege and money and power. And so Harvard was that. It was incredible. I mean, I always make fun of the silly little things that we had access to, like when it was raining and you'd want to go to the library and you had your umbrella. There were umbrella bags at the door, you know, to put your umbrella in. Like, you know, to have the money to have umbrella bags, you know what I mean?
The foresight to even think like, everyone needs their own umbrella. You simply won't.
And it's discardable, right? So tomorrow you can get another umbrella bag, you know? So it's just like having money to buy an umbrella bag. I mean, it's crazy. And then, but just outside, people are sleeping on the streets. Yeah.
You know, there's something that hits you when you go to those institutions, and maybe you've seen South African wealth, and I mean, you've spoken really interestingly about the parallels and the way that the wealth inequality mirrors South African wealth.
Yeah.
But there's something about when you see global wealth, you're like, oh wow, these are the South African bosses.
Yeah.
Like, the Oppenheimers answer to people here. that you'll never be the same when you see like the amount of wealth that is extracted from Africa that actually builds these institutions, and you finally see the inner chambers of global wealth.
Yeah. Harvard, I think, is, I mean, if you had thought you had seen wealth before, it is an extraordinary levels there. But also just the sheer amount of access. I mean, you would be getting a lunchtime email saying tomorrow, XYZ billionaire is coming to campus to talk about, and they won't say XYZ billionaire. This person's coming to campus. It's happening at this, together with the other person who's also talking in the next room, who also happens to be a billionaire, or the CEO of XYZ is coming. Literally one-on-one. The sheer access. I mean, in a classroom, you would be classmates with like a prince from whichever country, or this one's mother is a senator in XYZ, or this one's father is a president of X. These are people who you know, these are people who you have access to. And when it blew my mind, because you sort of see South African society, and you know, sometimes you get invited into certain rooms, etc. But Harvard is just at a different scale. And but also what it does for your life. The fact that you have that kind of access is incredible. I mean, one of my professors is married to a current US senator. Him and I are good friends. And there's she ran for president and was a very serious contender for that office. If she had gotten in, I literally would have been one person away from the president of the United States.
Wow.
And that's purely from going to Harvard.
Yeah.
I did nothing magical or special or anything, but just being there and having that kind of access to knowledge. It's mind-blowing. It was one of the things that took me back, and is still a great privilege that one has today.
How did you deal with the intimidation of the institution? And just to succeed and graduate is a massive journey, because all of this is coming at you. You're from South Africa, not from wealth, and suddenly you have to compete academically with the Saudi prince.
Yeah,
who has probably like 17 tutors. Yeah. There is that moment of, can I do this? Yeah. Am I equal to the task?
Yeah.
Take us through that journey of how you found the inner confidence, because that's what you need to say, I am equal to this.
Yeah. The first lecture you get when you get there in orientation week is about imposter syndrome. I'll be honest in saying I had never heard of it before then. The idea, I was like, what is this imposter syndrome that everybody's talking about? The idea, the sense that you don't particularly belong in a space. I can't ever say I felt out of place, because my method was, one, don't try and compete. Like you just won't. And two, keep your head down and just like do the work and let the work speak for you. And so I'll be honest and say I didn't have to wrestle per se with myself and like be like, okay, I don't belong here. Yeah. I think once one got in and this is the journey that you're going to follow, you just have to show up. And so if it's almost like, a duck that moves gracefully on water. You're kicking and screaming underneath, but when you show up to class, you've done the readings, you're prepared, you're arguing as vigorously as anybody else in that room. And that was important because I understood what it meant being there. And that I couldn't give myself room for self-doubt or to question why I was particularly there. I'm there now, make the best of it. And so I didn't feel out of place per se, but I also, because I think I quickly found my community of friends, people who also didn't come from privilege and didn't come from money, but also somehow got there. And it made it easier because there was a community of people who, you transitioned that journey through. So yeah, I mean, I'll be honest in saying I had a good time. I mean, in classrooms, as I was at Wits, was always a guy who had his hand up and debate a particular topic. And I enjoyed it. I mean, I was really there. It was a year-long program. I had to make the best of it. And so that was really my approach, yeah.
Fast forward to the journey to the bar, which is the place where advocates do their craft. Did you always know that you wanted to go to the bar, and how was entering the bar similar to your expectations and also different to your expectations? Especially in the early period when you just get there and you're doing pupillage and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it became clear to me that I wanted to be an advocate probably around first year of university. And it's because myself and two other very nerdy friends would in like the December holidays go to the Constitutional Court to go hear cases. Had no cooking clue what they were talking about. I mean, I remember hearing the word like paja, paya, and
I had that exact.
What is paja? What's paya?
That's important. Paja.
And then the advocates in the room would always be like referring if you go to like bundle X, Y, Z. I'm like, where are these bundles? Why don't we have them? And I found that engagement with the court interesting, because what I've seen advocates do is really get into the nub of the case because I enjoy the idea of the law and the philosophy behind the law. One thing law school always taught me is to ask the question why. And so rules don't merely exist for the sake of it. Why do they exist? What purpose do they fulfill?
Sure.
And one of the things our constitution tries to do is to strike at rules that have no purpose, right? If you're going to restrict people's liberties, there has to be a damn good reason why. And if you're unable to justify why those liberties have to be restricted, then that has to in fact be taken away. So that's a discipline certainly taught at the Wits Law School about asking those kinds of questions. And it's certainly something that informs the way in which I practice law. I ask, okay, it exists, sure, but to what end?
Do you remember any cases, by the way, just to go back in the journey, where you were first year that you watched that left an impression on you, or like a thing that happened in court that made a mark on you?
Yeah, it was the case KZN Joint Liaison Committee versus MEC for Education in KZN. I remember there was an Jason Brickhill, currently runs SERI today, was the advocate who appeared on behalf of the amici in that case, and it was in that case where I first heard words about Paja, and I was like, what the hell is Paja?
Who's Paja?
Who the hell is Paja? Like, what's the Paja? I mean, I feel like I'm a law student, I should know what Paja is. I had no idea what Paja was. So Jason argued to that case, and that case left a particular impression because he was young. It was his first appearance at the Constitutional Court, and I had formed a relationship through him through one of my best friends, Tsepo Mosaka, who's now Dr. Tsepo Mosaka at UCT, and Tsepo was Jason's mentee, and I had met Jason through that. But it was just the sheer, the Concord is an intimidating space if you're one man dealing with 11 judges, and it's that one-on-one engagement. But it's just how he was able to stand his ground. But the one case that struck me really, and I still remember that hearing to this day, is the matter of South African Informal Traders Forum versus City of Johannesburg. I was in my third year at the time. I was an intern at SERI. And it was like in the November-December period. Stuart Wilson, who is now a judge, was the executive director at the time.
Yes, of course.
And the city of Joburg came up with an operation called Operation Clean Sweep, where in December they decided that any informal trader on the pavements of the streets of Johannesburg had to be moved wholesale and be placed in the business center that they had planned to build in the future. Now, they implemented this project literally just before the December period, probably the busiest time, the time when people are lush with money and they're spending on their families, etc. But it's an important time for informal traders because that's really where you make, your buck.
Sure.
So they decided, overnight we're going to do this. And so the JMPD was out on the streets removing people forcefully. SERI, which typically does, eviction and housing cases, took on this case. And they brought an urgent, and I was assisting with research, etc. By then, at least I knew what Paja was,
Sure. You knew who?
I know who the hell Paja is now. And they launched an urgent in the High Court, and it got struck. The judge was like, this thing is not urgent, I'm not hearing it. There was just something very wrong about that. Again, that deep sense of injustice. How do you, in the face of what's happening, these are the facts that are put to you. No process, just a decision made overnight. Everybody must go. And the judge was like, no, it's not urgent. Despite the very real, clear, imminent likelihood that this is going to have a huge impact on the livelihoods of informal traders. Especially, and there was this a narrative that was ran that, there are these people to be discarded and thrown to the side, when the informal traders market is a huge contributor to GDP. So anyway, so the judge strikes the application, and it was, demoralizing to the whole team. What do we do next? And there was an internal debate, what do we do? Do we just enroll it in the ordinary course? But if we enroll it in the ordinary course, the impact of this would have materialized. The entire intention behind an urgent is, there's real harm happening right now, please assist. So a decision was then made that the application would go to there'd be an application to the Constitutional Court for direct access. Now, the Con Court almost never gives direct access. And it was a gamble to take a case for interim relief which is, as you know, at interim relief, you're just demonstrating probabilities and, real prospects of success at a later stage. The case on interim relief, an urgent direct access application to the Concord, that is a big gamble.
Yeah.
But why not? So an application was lodged, it went to the Concourt. The Concourt set it down. Now, usually they dismiss those applications on paper. It's December. The Concourt judges are usually aware it's recess at that time, but they set it down somehow miraculously. Set it down, and then the case was then enrolled, I think literally a week later or something.
Wow.
The judges of the court convened, all of us went to the hearing. When I tell you I had never seen the Concourt as alive as it was that day, where there was where the judges had a clear sense of the injustice that was happening there. Literally every one of them was on fire with questions, every single one. I had clocked the Concourt, had been to many Concourt hearings. Sure. To this day, I've never seen the court that alive. Wow. To a case, to the facts, to, and that case, I remember to this very day, just striking.
Wow.
Wow. So those, Jason's argument in first year, third year law school, I'm seeing this, and I think what was particularly striking about that case was there was a very immediate, real impact after the hearing. I mean, again, about the sense of injustice, it was very clear that the court gave an order that day, which it never does.
Wow.
All 11 gave an order that day, and they said, we'll give reasons later. So they gave an order granting urgency, granting direct access, giving the interim relief.
Wow.
But seeing a very real direct impact that very day on the ability of, I think at the time, Cyril was representing over 1,000 informal traders. The fact that they could go back and trade, something so, to many, very meager, being able to sell, bananas and apples, etc. on the sides of the street, but you've been allowed to do that by the highest court in the land. Clear, and advocates assisted in doing that. Very, very clear journey for me. So yeah, it's a combination of that and the fact that I like talking. So yeah.
Well, that's usually a good thing for an advocate.
Thanks for watching SMWX. Before we get back to the episode, I just wanted to let you know the 4 ways that you can help support this channel if you want to see us growing bigger and better to keep you more entertained and informed. The first way is you can invite me to speak at your company, your school, your institution. You'll see the contact details down below. The second way is that you can become a member of this channel. Become a member, or you can give us a thanks. You'll see there's like a heart with a $sign in the ribbon below this video. Buy me and the team some coffee for this episode. The third way you can get involved is you can advertise on the channel. Now, I'd much rather the community of viewers would be advertisers on this channel than me going out to people who don't really know about SMWX and trying to explain it to them. So if you're a viewer and you have a business and you want to partner and you love this platform, let's partner on this channel. And then finally, you can buy merchandise, you can buy books. All this is in the description down below. Now let's get back to the episode.
You go to the bar and you become Advocate Tembeka Ngukai-Tobi's final mentee or pupil as they used to, or still, or whatever. But when you become an advocate, you have to sit for a year at the feet of someone who's been doing it for a long time and learn the craft. You don't get paid.
Yeah.
And you just have to imbibe all of the knowledge that they pass on to you.
Yeah.
Tell us about that first year at the bar, and also what it was like to serve under such a renowned figure.
Yeah.
I think he became a senior counsel the year after, or so you were his final pupil.
That's right, yeah.
What was that year like?
Yeah.
Going to the bar and also being the pupil of Advocate Ngukai-Tobi?
Yeah. Sure, the bar was tough, first year.
So you mean Harvard was a stroll?
No, look, I'll tell you, Harvard academically challenged me to the brim. Like, I say what I say about the US and Harvard, but the level,
the standard
in that classroom, exceptional.
Yeah,
exceptional.
Can imagine.
And with the volume, with the just really exceptional, the best I've seen.
That's the difference. It's like it's not that everyone is super smart. It's just that the floor is so high that the standard is the top.
Yeah, and you have no choice but to perform.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it was really the stark difference between my Wits Law School classroom, where in some classes, a lecturer is standing, they're just reading out their written notes. And Harvard, which uses the Socratic method, where, as it's seen sometimes in TV, like movies, like films, where there's a professor and they're just asking you questions, and the level of, it challenged me, I kid you not. And also, added to that is just I was a guy who read every single case in law school. So I didn't read the summaries, etc. I would read cover to cover because I really felt like I could remember cases that way easier, but I could really engage with the meat of the cases by reading cover to cover.
Yeah.
I tried to do that at Harvard. It was just not possible.
Sure. Just the volume.
The volume was crazy. So no, the level there was just exceptional.
Yeah.
Exceptional.
Yeah.
But so pupillage was difficult. It's difficult for financial reasons. You do not get paid for that entire year. It is mentally challenging. And I remember one senior saying to me that you will never forget your year of pupillage. And that's very true. He at the time was 15 years at the bar and he still remembered his pupillage. You will never forget it. Because you're being challenged academically, you're being challenged mentally, you're being challenged financially.
Sure.
And through all of that, you must still, again, glide like a duck over water. And so the intensity wasn't so much in the academic work. So pupillage assumes you know the knowledge. So it's not, you've done law school, now take that knowledge and apply it, right? So how do you move, know about paja and motions and action proceedings and pleas, etc. That's all in the books, fine. How do you take that and actually with a real life case demonstrate that? So it was that challenging, because all throughout school, all of it was, do you understand this as it's written in the books? Can you grapple with those principles? But now you have to apply them. So it was challenging from that perspective. But it was also a lot of fun. It is the one time in your probably post-university or legal career where you can make silly mistakes, where you can have drunken, stupid nights with your, pupil classmates. And it's fun in the sense that, when you sometimes laugh at your own struggle, where you're get a 4 out of 10 or 3 out of 10 for a legal writing exercise. And everybody in the classroom also got 3 out of 10 or 4 out of 10. All of us laugh about it. So, there was a camaraderie about it, etc. Pupillage is tough, no doubt. But once you get, and it moves very quickly. I mean, you start in January, it's a full year, but by the time you get, it's January, in August you're writing exams, in October you start doing practicals, and then you're out in the world after that. So it really moves at a fast pace, and each day it feels like punches, but you still have to get up and fight. With Tembeka, sure, I had met him through Jason. So I didn't know him, I didn't know of him until I had said to Jason, probably in my 4th year now at university, hey, I'm thinking about going to do, I've thought about what I've seen what attorneys do, I've seen what advocates do, I really want to go to the bar. Is there a mentor that you would recommend? He's like, actually, there is someone. So at the time, Tembeka was the director of litigation at, not CALD's, Charleston's LRC, that's right, so Legal Resource Center. So he was a director of litigation there, and they had known each other from there. So he's like, no, there's a guy I need to introduce you to. So Jason did an introduction over email. Tembeka said, let's have coffee. We went to have coffee, and we had a great time. I was like, okay, this is going to work. So I then left, went abroad. So I had earmarked him, if you will. So in first year of when I was clerking for at the Concord, I was like, okay, I'm gonna go abroad. I'll be back at XYZ time. Can I do pupillage with you in 2017? I think it was. And he's like, sure, let's do it. So I come back again probably 3 years later, and it's time to do pupillage. So we had a relationship prior to that. And I sort of got a sense of what it is that he expects, what he wants to do, etc. We had even tried writing co-authoring a chapter in a book together, but we ultimately did write something together and edited a book together. So there's a book out there, Public Interest Litigation in South Africa, that we were involved in. But in pupillage, sure. I mean, Tembeka throws you in the deep end and he's like, swim. So he is incredibly generous with his advice, incredibly generous with his time.
Is there a piece of advice that he gave you that you remember to this day that like has stood you in good stead at the bar?
Yeah. Let your work be your loudest advocate. Literally. He says there'll be lots of noise at the bar, there'll be lots of politics at the bar, whatever. But what people can never take away from you is the quality of your work and what it is that you produce. Because that's besides politics, that's besides all of that.
Absolutely.
Let your work be your loudest advocate. He told me that the first day when we had coffee, actually. Yeah.
So that's such an important lesson across disciplines and the world. Yeah, because you can get so lost in the politics and the noise, and this person said this about you, and this person thinks you're great, and this person thinks you're terrible, and the work is what matters.
The work stands. Your record stands as it is. And I remember asking him, you know, how has he gotten there? You know, were there like particular secrets, etc. He's like, no, it's just, I let my work be my loudest advocate, and that's how I got here. And this is before the fame, right? So this was before the fame happened for him when I was at Harvard, and it was I remember like the Zuma case that went to the Concord where everybody was asking, who's this guy? But what people don't see is the years of work to get to that quality, to get to that standard. People see the end result, but not the actual hard work. So anyway, the pupillage with him was extraordinary.
Must have been.
He, you know, thank God for the famous years, because when he was doing great work, but when I got there, it was really just almost like the Constitutional Court again. You know, really interesting cases. There was not a weekend, I recall, saying there was not a weekend where you open the Sunday paper and there was some political controversy that he was not somehow involved in as a legal advisor of sorts.
Wow.
And so you felt very real, impactful work that people were talking about. So he throws you in the deep end. He expects you to swim, and you just have to manage. So it was that just incredibly timed, and his advice and the work. Tembeke really cares about output, and so you have to swim. Yeah.
Do you have any advice for those who are interested in the craft of advocacy? We've actually spoken to him about this on the show. We've spoken to a line of advocates actually. You're quite deep into the bar now. You know, you're doing incredible work, obviously. What kind of things do you think that those coming into the profession in the future should bear in mind to let their work be the loudest advocate?
Sure. What I've often found to be, and now the one is a little bit more senior at the bar, what I've found to be a common problem is the almost, I want to say probably flippant way in which people move through cases. There's the silent period before you argue a case where you sit in the stillness of a day or two before, and you really think about the arguments, etc. But that's it. By then, it's almost too late because the papers are in, it's settled, etc. But if from jump you had really gotten into the niche of it, like people think it's ridiculous that when I read my papers, I read every single page in the brief, every single one, because you don't know what you might find on page 2001.
Oh my.
And when you've prepared your case with that rigor, where you go line by line through everything, you are so much better for it at the end. And so there's just, you know, the sort of patchwork that one sometimes sees where you like miss out on an important detail that isn't there. So I guess I'd say care about the detail.
Yeah.
Care. It is as important as the big points. Care about the detail, which you sort of see people run through it really.
Yeah. How do you do that when the workload becomes, like
with very little sleep?
Oh no.
With very little sleep. Yeah. I mean.
And have you felt that, like, as you become more senior in the more responsibility, maybe you get quicker and more efficient, or you know, or not? Maybe it's just like the hours.
It's a proverbial problem that every advocate has. You know, you take a brief and you're like, oh yeah, I should have capacity for it.
You
know, are you available for XYZ? Yeah, I'm available for that. And then somehow something else that you committed to a while ago, the deadline comes at the same time, and then something else, the deadline comes at the same time. And there's no magic to it. If you ask any advocate, they'll say, okay, don't take on too much work because, and it's important. You have to show up with every brief because what you find is you've only got a finite amount of time in a day.
Yeah.
You are better if you're spending a full day on one matter than you are on 3 matters in one day. And there's no magic to it. I haven't come across anyone who's been able to magically deal with it. Because the difficulty with that is you're still expected to perform at that level despite the sheer volume of work.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I don't know if there's no magic trick. I try my best to say no to work where I'm just like, look, it's not going to be possible. I just don't have the time. As interesting as that is, I can't. But I still find myself trapped. I mean, just last week, the week
after the ICJ, phone was blowing up.
You just try. You try your best. There's really no magic to it. But for me, it's just if you have to put in the hours, you have to care about the details. You really have to. Yeah.
Let's talk about that ICJ moment. We've gone through your journey. Of course, so far that's almost the culmination of everything that went into your journey.
Yeah.
Never mind the Concourt and the 11 judges. You're sitting before, what was it, 17 that day? Or
17
of the world's finest jurists at the International Court of Justice.
Yeah.
The country is watching. The world is watching. You couldn't imagine a case of higher stakes.
Yeah.
And I mean, how did you just tell us everything about that? but that we wouldn't have seen.
Yeah.
How did you get involved in a case like that? And did it dawn on you when you became involved how big that legal moment was going to be?
Yeah. Sure. How I got involved was Tembeka had insisted that myself and Lerato had to be in the case.
Wow.
So the way in which it works is, usually, in a matter like that, government will approach the seniors and the seniors get to pick their juniors.
Right.
And so that's how the two of us got involved. That's the other thing about Tembeka is that he will be allowed as advocates in rooms that you are not in. I've heard it time and time again from people who, CEOs of XYZ company will say, oh yeah, he spoke about you. He said 1, 2, 3 about you. I'm immensely grateful to him. I certainly would not be here without him at all. So that's how I got in. I think he got a call from government.
Yeah.
I'm not sure who exactly in government. And he said, yeah, these are the 2 juniors that I want. And that's how the 2 of us got involved. It's December.
Yeah.
Everybody is winding down, popping champagne and, custard and jelly and trifles and all of that. And we are working. I remember on the 31st, my friend had a New Year's Eve party at his house. On the 31st of December, I was on a call with Tembeka and Lerato, I think, until about 10 o'clock.
Oh.
I had my laptop with me, happy on the other side, but I'm, working. Wow. And so it just had to be that way. There was certainly, one didn't have a full December and all of that fun stuff. I'm still waiting for my break.
Yeah,
it's coming. I'm going to try and squeeze it in some point. I don't know when. So it's move very quickly. The cases. What was extraordinary about this is that I think the application went off on the 29th of December. Either that day or the day after, the court says, okay, great, come on the 11th and the 12th of January. And so it's an urgent, obviously, but I don't think any of us expected a response that quick.
Yeah.
And so that just cancelled your December plans where this thing is moving ahead. I've never appeared before the International Court of Justice.
So.
I used to teach public international law at Wits, but had never appeared before that court.
Wow.
And so it's one thing to teach about the principles, use Cogans and law students would know erga omnes and all of that. And another to actually see it in practice. That's really the big leap between law school and practice as an advocate. So I'd never seen it, and importantly, never imagined being at that court.
Yeah.
Never imagined being at that court ever.
Yeah.
And so when you get the call, and and I didn't get a call. It's essentially how it happened was I was just put on a WhatsApp group. And then the case is moving. Now, like I wasn't asked, are you accepting the brief or not? I sort of put on a WhatsApp group. The formalities of briefs and all of that came after the fact.
Sure.
Yeah.
Can I just ask one question about this? Like, the speed at which you had to put that case together, I think is one of the things that is underappreciated.
Yeah.
The sheer amount of legal instruments that you would have had to go through, but also factual material. And I think probably more than any other publication, let alone legal publication, the way that the team was able to synthesize the case and distill it for a simple understanding in all that complexity in such a short period of time is nothing short of an intellectual masterwork on behalf of the team.
Yeah. Look,
how the heck did you do that?
There was huge support. There's 3 researchers who've been. I'd want to mention it, but I don't know if they want to be mentioned.
Right. Okay.
Were essential to. So it certainly wasn't a one-man effort. They put in crazy hours to put it all together. So that was immensely helpful.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, even to this day, if you turn on my phone, I'm sure I probably have like 100 notifications now, where we're constantly working the case every single day without fail. So yeah, it's that without giving away much. That's really but so December happens. We're preparing as frantically as we can for and a lot is happening and moving at the same time. I remember just the sheer sense of gratitude I had. Sure, when they say our ancestors' wildest dreams, I mean, the sheer sense of gratitude and the enormity of the case. By far the biggest case I've been involved in.
I think you're going to have to go a long time possibly before you see something like that again. Like any lawyer, to be honest.
It really is like just one of those like once in a lifetime kinds of cases. So but which brings me actually to something that's concerned me. I mean, one of the things that Rato and I were talking about was just how that international legal practice in that court in other forests does not look like people like you and I.
Absolutely.
It doesn't look like Lerato. It doesn't look like, often what you find is that African states are either applicants in that court or respondents in that court, but the advocates are not. And so there's a strong dominance of English lawyers in that space.
Sure.
Who won't say, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. There'll be another case tomorrow or another case tomorrow. In fact, I was listening to a podcast probably a day or two ago where this academic had did empirical data research on the history of a court and the appearances in that court. And in the period that he was assessing, I think from 1998 until 2011, he said of the 98 cases that were before the court, 80% of them were by non-OECD countries, right? So not the West, not and of that, the number of black folks that had appeared was less than 10%, which is a shocking number.
Yeah.
Because international law is not for the exclusive purview of English lawyers, nor is it for the exclusive understanding of English lawyers. But it's particularly concerning because advocates have a direct impact on the shaping of the law. The kind of cases that are being argued, the principles that are being argued. Now imagine taking, our principles from our constitution and infusing that into international law. But that's not possible if you just know South Africans are appearing before that court.
I think that's what was so powerful about that day and why it stirred even in people who thought they were long past patriotism, why it stirred something in them, because it was our lawyers, yes, of course, Professor Lowe was there and KC was there. But it was our lawyers as well, demonstrating that not only was our case strong and moral, but it was expertly delivered. And we were not just as good as, but better. You don't need to say it, but like, better, you know, than those on the other side who had written international law textbooks and, you know, some of whom had been there and were old hands in that court.
Yeah.
You know, there was something about going there as a South African team that was such a powerful statement.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I think what it was represented for us is that it's possible, and what, you know,
at so many in the world.
Yeah, at so many levels, South Africans can perform and compete and be better.
Yeah, that's what you saw in your Harvard class. Like that. In my academic experience, there's like this moment where you're like, hold on, I'm not worse than these people. I'm actually as good, if not better. Yeah. I just never knew because I could never compete against them.
Yeah, and you're not missing anything. Right? Like it's not. And when there's lots that's wrong about our country.
Oh yeah.
But Jesus, man, when we show up on a global stage, we really do. In so many spaces. I mean, this is shortly after like the Rugby World Cup win. Our performance at the Cricket World Cup, and the netball, and you know, and now in law, you know, someone had said the case was like the Olympics in the legal world, you know, and South Africa, you know, won 15-2, you know. So yeah, it just really dawned on me in that moment that Jesus, I mean, even in that we can come toe to toe with what the West, what the world calls some of the best international lawyers.
Absolutely.
But that it can't end there. And I don't know what it is that I can individually do, but it absolutely can't end there. That it shouldn't be, Tsidiso Lerato and all the others, you know, appeared in this case and it happened once. There should be many more others. And it doesn't have to end with South Africans. There are talented lawyers across the continent, many of whom I've met in Namibia, in Lesotho, in Nigeria, who would do as well, if not better, in those forums. So we just need to do better with that. But I understood what it symbolized. Win or lose the case.
Sure.
What it meant to young black South Africans, what it meant to young black lawyers, that we were there. And so it just really was just beyond ourselves and, you know, patting ourselves on the back or whatever.
I know we can't delve into the merits of the case, so we're going to steer away from that because it could well be with us for a very long time. What about the reaction to the judgment, though, on a personal level? Because I think there was such great tension in the country when we all felt as though we had delivered a really strong case that was also on the right side of the law and history. But it was in the judge's hands from there. And for them to come back so resoundingly, I mean, what did that mean to you and the team? And, you know, can you take us into like just what the team was saying? Like, how did you all respond when the court came out so strongly in your favor?
I mean, it probably reminds me of the feeling in Gundwan, you know, and South African Informal Traders Forum, you know, just like, I don't know how it is. It's a different euphoria. The case is not about us. It's not about the lawyers. It's not about South Africa. It's about the suffering Palestinians, and unfortunately, the sheer silence of the world to that. It was just an excessive jubilance. There are some members of the team who might have shed a tear or two. I won't disclose who.
I'm sure.
But it was just sheer jubilance because say what you want about the law, it can do that. It can recognize suffering and sometimes bring an end to suffering. And the fact that as lawyers, as advocates, we play a small part in doing that. And that's really what's so great about the work. You touch something and there's almost an immediate impact. And I don't know of anything out there that has, for me personally, that has that same sort of impact. An impact that it's not just, you know, wealth accumulation, how much money do you have, all of that. But it's thousands of people at the same time, you know, because of, you know, things written in a book. So it was, everybody was, I mean, and we were all in different parts of the world, you know, and then I think we convened that night. We had a Zoom call, just be like, hey guys,
did that just happen?
Yeah, did that just happen? You know.
Yeah.
And of course, shortly after those celebrations, the next question. Okay, next step. So what do we? Yeah.
So can you just
typical of lawyers? Yeah, like okay, well done.
Yeah.
Have your glass of champagne. Let's move. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I guess to end off, and hopefully, you know, down the years we'll be able to have more of these conversations. But we've been having, you know, a long-running set of conversations on this channel with Advocate Toby, Kakane, many others about the Constitution and South Africa's Constitution. And I think there's a real need in this particular moment in our country's history to look at the Constitution in a clear-eyed way, but also potentially to avoid any of the extremes on either side of that debate, which really cloud whether the Constitution is either this perfect document that is holy writ or is the worst thing that's ever existed and the cause of all of our injustice and inequality.
Yeah.
You know, what is your view on the transformative potential of the South African Constitution? Are you skeptical about it, or are you optimistic about it, and why? And how do you grapple with the text's place in our society right now?
You know, I think the Constitution has done what it can. It has set ambitious goals about what we can as a society achieve, what each of us are entitled to. Which some, in fact, what's funny about this debate that's happening probably over the last year or two is it's the same debate that was had as the Constitution was being drafted. Like, are these not too lofty goals? Like, can you really meet up to all of these dreams? And the Constitution is an empty shell in the absence of action. And so the Constitution can't do more than make those particular promises that we, the people, say, this is a reflection of our society. I think in the absence of clear political action, it will remain an empty vessel. And so I don't think it as a thing, as a document, can do more. It's much like people will say, you know, the XYZ person has broken the law. How do we fix that? Oh, we just change the law. You know, there's no amount of more legal action, more judgments that can fundamentally change South African society in the absence of political action. Literally nothing can be done. And we see it in cases often. You get a massive victory, everybody is happy, and then very little happens after that. That's not the failure of the law or the failure of the Constitution, it's the implementers of it that are to be held accountable. So I'm not sure if there's anything more that can be done other than that. It would be a different conversation altogether. People were saying, we think the goal on, as we're seeing now the debate about Section 25, that perhaps 25(1), which freezes and protects property rights as they existed at the time, it requires amending, given the vast inequalities in our country. But it's also inherently contradictory in the sense that in 25(8) and 25(9) it says, you know, or rather 25(2) going down sets out the steps that government must take to give effect to 25. But then in 28 it says nothing in this provision stops government from taking those progressive measures, right? Including 25(1) that freezes property rights. But it can say that, and you can amend it tomorrow, right? You can pass an amendment tomorrow saying there are no property protections, everything must be given over to the state and it must start distributing that. The document can say that, but it will be dead words, empty words in the absence of those actions. So you can amend it until you turn blue. It's not going to change much in the absence of political action. So I've often found the debate about it to be not what is the instruments of the Constitution that prevent you from doing that work. It's that there's been absence of action and we think it's the Constitution's fault. And I've never seen certainly the connection between the two arguments. You know, when it says, for instance, you know, everybody has a right to a basic education, it said it. How will amending that change it? Unless what you're saying is the goal in the text itself is not one that we identify with anymore, which is why the 25 debate is relevant. But outside of that, I don't know. That's just my view.
And it is a document which is capable of also undergoing metamorphosis itself. So I suppose in challenging the Constitution, one also has to appreciate that the text as it is at any given time is not fixed. Into the future. There are ways of evolving the text. That for me is the interesting conversation. is between like it's the worst thing in the world and it's the best thing in the world.
Yeah.
In what ways should it be mutating or evolving now, you know, to meet a new era? And it has changed in the past.
Yeah.
It will change in the future, I guess.
Yeah. No, I mean, one has to accept that it is a document that will change. You know, there's some constitutional law scholars who say the Constitution is a reflection rather of society's conscience, right? And if those goals particularly shift, then amend. I mean, it expressly says I want these goals, but you can amend me if you're unhappy about it, right? So it's in the text. Where I think the debate has been missing is identifying what in the text is a problem and is not a true reflection of who we are as a society. One, and two, is there a separation between the absence of political action and measures taken to eradicate inequality and what the Constitution in fact aspires to? And it's an interesting dichotomy because you often find judges almost forced in cases to be activists in their role beyond what we imagine judges to be able to do. Where, you know, I recall when the Concord, for instance, first gave out a supervisory order. You know, I mean, we remember it wasn't the first case, but the most recent example is the SASA one. It's you know, report back on XYZ. Tell us, judges shouldn't be doing that if our political systems were working, where a judge has to monitor your compliance with constitutional obligations.
Yeah,
and say, you know, you haven't met this, you haven't met that. And in other cases where, you know, judges have been accused of, for instance, you know, breaching the separation of powers in order to get to I remember a judgment of the Concord, I think was it Mahlangu? I stand to be corrected, but there's a judgment of the Concord. I remember Cameron wrote those particular paragraphs in the judgment itself. And he says, you know, where the separation of power stands in the way of us dealing with an injustice that is naked and pure and clear to everybody, it cannot stand. Judges cannot be barred by the separation of powers from dealing with suffering and injustice. And if separation of powers stands in the way, then the Constitution demands better and it demands more. Because if there has to be a conflict between what the separation of powers demands and what judges can do and what the Constitution demands, then so be it. For separation of powers, really, that's what Cameron was saying in there. So yeah, I think of course it can be amended, but what is it about it that requires amending that is absent from what's happening today, and how much of that is the absence of political action? Yeah.
Well, Tsidiso Ramokgale.
Yeah.
SC soon to be. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us on SMWX, and we look forward to watching your career continue to unfold, and all the best for the future, not to mention that ICJ case.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. Spread the fire.
Aye.